Hello everyone, thanks for dropping by. I think I'll do something different this week, and this video will probably be way over the 10-minute mark. I'll try and get it all done in an hour, but it could overflow. As you can see, there's 5 people on the front. That from left to right, there's President Lukashenko of Belarusia, President Putin of Russia, former Chancellor Merkel of Germany, the former President Hollande of France, and former President Poroshenko of Ukraine. Now this was done in May 2014 at the Normandy format, where they got together and try and knock things together and find a solution to the Donbass problem, which has been the major cause of concern since 2014, and the US sticking its nose into Ukraine's business with the CIA, State Department, manufactured and financed coup, and Victoria Noodleman with a big bag of cookies. Now this led up to a war in the Donbass region, and this was the first one. This is dated 26/2014. It's where they tried to militarily take back the Donbass into Ukrainian control, and the Ukrainian army got its arse kicked. I'm not going to go through it because there's too much to go through. I've got about 72 links and I want to get through them all in about an hour. The fighting stopped, but there was ceasefire violations from both sides, and it's reported by the OSCE. This was in May 2015. This is a chart telling you what the UAF, Ukrainian Armed Forces, Ukrainian Armed Force Artillery, violations, separatists, separatist artillery, and unknown. This carried on until 29th of June 2017. The harvest in Ukraine, because Ukraine is a large food manufacturing area, they needed to harvest. This is what they grow there. Of course, with the current fighting, all that has come to a complete stop. But they did eventually come to an agreement to stop the fighting. In its bulletin, analyze deterrent security situation in the Donbass region of Ukraine, its potential consequences, exacerbation of hostilities, and they did come to a harvest ceasefire agreement so they get the harvest in. This is from South Front, more of that later, on September 2nd, 2019. Now the war has been simmering on for 8 years in that part of the world, and the Western world has generally turned its back on it and were just not interested. But with the recent events, they've had to get involved, otherwise it could flare up into something the West and America doesn't want. Europe's forgotten war between Western-backed Ukraine and Russian-sponsored self-proclaimed Donbass People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic over the energy-rich Donbass region in eastern Ukraine has been on hold for 6 years. It's now 8 years. Now, the DPR intelligence reveals Kiev completed a Donbass offensive plan. As this was the second one, they got their asses kicked, but then Uncle Sam came in and started training them and giving them better equipment and showing them how NATO fights, so they're going to have another go. The DPR has informed that Ukraine Armed Forces General Staff has completed the deployment of the Donbass Offensive Operation Plan. Now, the Russians probably got wind of that, because the Russians have probably been monitoring what the UAF has been doing, and the concentration of forces and means of Ukrainian armed forces, in the region makes it possible to do it at any moment as soon as a political decision is made. Now the Ukrainian branch, the Russian branch of Reuters, says Russia says Ukraine has deployed half its army to the Donbass conflict zone. Russia has accused Ukraine of deploying half its army of 125,000 soldiers to Donbass, a conflict zone in eastern Ukraine. There's been increased drone activity. This is the Tasman news agency, which is Iranian. They're more or less saying the same thing. Where is it? I'll put these all links below. There's 72 links, so I might be able to get them all in the description box, but I don't know. Anyway, they found lots of drone activity along the Donbass border region. The Russians got wind of this, so that's why they moved their troops to their side of the border to give Ukraine more or less a warning of, don't provoke us, otherwise you're going to get a reckoning. And even the British Independent got in on the act. Russia says Ukraine has deployed half its army, 125,000 troops, to conflict zone. And they more or less say the same thing. Was that gonna go off? Yes. Now, come on. There we go. Now, Ukraine, this was done on 4th of the April 2021 last year. Ukraine does not expect Russian attack in Donbass, but they must have been getting worried because the Viktor Litovkin, a senior Russian security expert, remarked Russia would not stand idle if Ukraine starts a military operation towards Donbass, meaning the 125,000 troops and massive drone activity along that. The drone activity was reconnaissance to see where the separatist armed forces were based and positions of them, etc. The Ukraine noticed the Russian build-up and they started to get worried. No plan for offensive operations in Donbass. Ukraine has never planned and does not plan any offensive operations in East Ukraine. Well, why have 125,000 troops in that area then? Instead, together with partners in Normandy format, that's the original 5, Kiev has consistently sought ways to resolve the crisis through political and diplomatic means. And to emphasize the point, 24 days ago, that's February the 11th, Ukraine not planning provocations, offensive actions in Donbass. The foreign minister, that's that guy, Dmytro Kuleba. But it all boils down to the Minsk agreement. If everybody had implemented it, none of this fighting today would have happened. It had all stopped years ago. But this is about the Minsk II agreement, telling you all about it. This is more or less the second Ukrainian attack and how it got nearly wiped out. And this is the thing about it. The Minsk agreement is a series of international agreements which sought to end the war in the Donbass region of Ukraine. The first, known as the Minsk Protocol, was drafted in 2014. The trilateral contract group in Ukraine, consisting of Ukraine, Russia, and the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, with mediation of the leaders of France and Germany, as on the front at the beginning of this video. Now, this is what they wanted to agree to. Ukraine front line, insurgent front line, and a buffer zone. 15 each wide, so beyond artillery range. But the Donbass military found evidence that they're plotting for an assault that way and that way to pinch it off and cut the Donbass region off from Russia. That's why Russia put the troops in this area and in Belarus to say, don't try it or else. In other words, you threaten a mother bear looking after her cubs and you're going to get a reckoning. Now this is the Minsk agreement. You can read all about it, but the signatories, the Swiss diplomat, former president of Ukraine, the Russian ambassador of Ukraine and Russian representatives, and the rebel heads. But it all came to naught. Whoops, a bit too far. By now the Americans are starting to get a bit worried, and Russia's military build-up enters a more dangerous phase. Satellite images show troops and equipment massing ever closer to Ukraine. The word invade is a very emotional word. The public in general are not particularly, I wouldn't say stupid, but they like simple things that they can get their head round, and they know what invade means. Now this is the first issue of that word that I've found. It was 11th of February 2022. US warned of distinct possibility Russia will invade Ukraine within days. And then he goes on trying to ease things with his presidential address at the White House. You can read that yourself. Says we're not going to move eastward, we're not going to put missiles in Ukraine, Ukraine's not going to be in NATO, etc. But the American TV networks sent in a story, i.e. if it bleeds, it leads, jumped on the bandwagon, and US says Russia has added 7,000 troops along Ukraine border despite claims of pullback. And now the Western propaganda shitstorm starts and the insanity from the Western media. The CNBC, Biden warns of imminent attack, says diplomacy is still possible. If Russia chooses war, it will pay a steep price. And then the vassals of America, Al Jazeera, i.e. not Kuwait, Qatar, jumped on the bandwagon. Biden's convinced that Russia will make a decision to invade Ukraine. And ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, Australia, US President Biden is convinced Russia will invade Ukraine in the coming days. And allies join US imposing sanctions pressure on Russia over Ukraine. And then the BBC jumped on the bandwagon because the BBC has always hated Russia. Why has Russia invaded Ukraine, and what does Putin want? And again, that word, invade, invading. Now, Russia has never said they're going to invade a country. Putin says it's a police action. You could also say it's an armed humanitarian intervention, but the public doesn't understand what those three words mean. They just like simple words like invade, where it says humanitarian intervention is a use of military force to address extraordinary suffering of people. In this case, it's the people of the Donbass region that have been shelled and mortared for 8 years, such as genocide or similar large-scale violation of basic human rights, where people's suffering results from their own government actions or failures to act. These interventions are also called armed interventions or armed humanitarian interventions or humanitarian wars. They are interventions to protect, defend, or rescue other people from gross abuse attributable to their own government. The armed intervention is conducted without the consent of the offending nation, thus interfering militarily or more or less or one or more states or international organizations, which is exactly what Russia's done. Russia saw that the Ukrainian armed forces were planning a major assault, and even though they said no, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Russia put 150, 170,000 troops on the border to say, don't do it or else. But they went ahead and did it. So Russia decided, we're going to nip this in the bud, and then they went. And here's another one. International military interventions, identification and classification. International military intervention is the movement of troops or forces of one country into the territory or territorial waters of another country, or military action by troops already stationed by one country inside another in the context of some political issue or dispute. As such a discrete event persisting in time, entailing military action, are officially designed armed forces to influence either domestic disputes or political conditions in a target state, i.e. what's happening in the Donbass region. And even the US military, the US Department of Defense, doesn't call it an invasion. They call it a military intervention, the deliberate act of a nation or a group of nations to introduce its military forces into the course of an existing controversy. Well, if you go on Google and military intervention definition, the deliberate act of a nation or a group of nations to introduce its military forces in the course of existing controversy. Definition. An example: the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, the British military intervention in Sierra Leone, the coalition military intervention in Libya, the military intervention against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Once again, humanitarian intervention. Humanitarian intervention is the use of threat of force by a state or states across borders with the intent of ending severe and widespread human rights violations in a state which has not given permission for the use of force. The same thing that we saw in Ukraine. The Russians saw that the Ukrainians were going to launch a major assault against the Donbass region, and they decided that enough is enough, we're going in and we're going to stop it. And of course the Western media went absolutely apeshit about it, and thus we had the emotional word of invade. And of course they forget that the Goebbels said, the Nazi Minister of Propaganda, repeat a lie often enough and people will believe it. That's not me saying it. It's Dr. Steve Kellman at Harvard University. That's all you hear from the Western media: invade, invade, invade. So they've taken a page out of the Goebbels book of propaganda. Also, George Orwell, his book 1984, the people will believe what the media tells them they believe. The people believe that Russia's invaded. They can't say that Russia has done a military intervention or an armed humanitarian intervention. They just see the word invade, and that's what's triggered them off. Come on. Now, I don't worry about the mainstream media. I got a lot of my information from this site, Southfront. As you can see, the current one is, they said that the Russians are shelling the people in Mariupol. The Ukrainian terrorists are shelling the people in Mariupol. It's up to you. Ukrainian blocks humanitarian corridors, nationalists massacring civilians. Somebody in Ukraine got the bright idea to empty all the prisons and give all the inmates and other people like them a military rifle and ammunition and let them get on with it. Now they're roaming all over the Kiev, terrorizing the citizens, probably taking out their rivals and generally causing chaos in that city, and the population of Kiev are suffering. But that South Front, it's worth watching if you want an alternative media. It's a crowdfunded endeavour, but they don't pick sides, they just give you the facts. Also, Brother Nathaniel, I've also watched some of his videos. This is the latest one, Unhinged Against Russia. The minor religion that controls America is essentially behind a lot of this, but they're going to get their money power destroyed because they've gone too far, too often, and it's going to be a reckoning to them. Another alternative media source is this. It's Gap. I'm not subscribed to it. I don't intend to. I think this is a version of Russian Facebook. It gives you the other side and the Russian side, and not centering like Facebook does. And this is an interesting thing. Australia faces the most difficult and dangerous security environment in 80 years. Australia, America's little pygmy. This is how the Russians see America and NATO. Not enough, push for space. And this is what America's done. And this is what will happen when it's all over. As Henry Kissinger said, America doesn't have any permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. He might have been a miserable old Jew, but Henry Kissinger at least knew how the real world works, and he did his best to steer America through troubled waters so he doesn't get embroiled in foreign conflicts they can't get out of. Like this one. Why can't China do more to help put out the fire, as he puts gasoline on it? And that's the bookmarks. And so the media circus carries on. Ukrainian conflict. Liz Truss, our Foreign Secretary, backs people from UK who want to fight. This was done on the 27th of February. She says she supports individuals from the UK who might want to go to Ukraine and join an international force to fight. Well, none of the MPs are going to join it, but of course the Ukrainians, the Magnificent Seven, though if you read the article, only 3 of them are going to fight. Ukraine crisis, Ukraine prepared to go home to fight. And Sky jumped in on the bandwagon. Britain's willing to die to defeat Putin's army as volunteers prepare to travel to fight Russian invasion. Hundreds of British volunteers are expected to take up arms to defend Ukraine, with some of already having arrived in the country, according to the commander of a foreign legion of fighters. And the Daily Mail was a bit more cautious in its headline. Boris Johnson hints UK's lads' army will be treated like terrorists on return from Ukraine. He urged them not to join Zelensky's civilian fight back, a city banker whose hero is George Orwell, who was in the International Brigade, and Jim Boss, ex-SAS soldier, making their way to the front line. And The Independent, it's the right thing to do, meet the Brits going to fight Russian forces and help refugees in Ukraine. And of course we can always count on the Sun to provide us with this kind of headline. Ex-British Army snipers among dozens of British veterans vowing to fight for Ukraine. Excuse me. Dads versus Vlad. I told my wife to go on bird watching. She'll freak when she finds out I'm fighting in Ukraine. And British ex-military heroes cross into Ukraine to fight Putin's forces. And other such nonsense headlines from a tabloid paper owned by Rupert Murdoch, the American Australian living in America. Now all these guys think they're part of the International Brigade. In the 1930s they went to Spain, and it says it estimated during the war between 40 and 59,000 members served in the international brigades, including 15,000 who died in combat. Around about 30,000 were involved in combat, and half of them got killed. So half of these muppets are either going to come home in a body bag, or they're going to get captured. And they're essentially mercenaries, so they better read the Geneva Convention about how mercenaries are treated. So I don't think the Russians are going to treat them kindly. That's if they get captured, of course, and not end up meeting the maker. But we do have a voice of reason. Defence Chief contradicts Liz Truss over idea of Britain going to fight in Ukraine. So Tony Radakin it would be unlawful for individuals to travel to offer military help. But you've got to register with the Guardian for that and stuff that. And they should also understand they're not the first ones to go that way. I found this from 2014. It's a Russian publication. Foreign mercenaries killed in failed UAF offensive. That was the first one that started this video on. The UAF attempt to break through DPR positions and Leninsko ended in the death of 15 foreign mercenaries and 25 wounded in Kiev fighters. So all these numpties, including this guy, they'll either get killed, captured, or wounded. Then what? Now, the presidential election in Ukraine was won by Zelensky. He beat his arch-rival Poroshenko. 15 million votes, 73% turnout to 4.5 million votes in 24%. No, percentage with a 62% turnout. Now the list of presidents, there's the current one, there's the previous one. This guy was president when all this started. He's currently in Russia. He wanted to have good ties with Russia because he understood Russia is on his border and the Ukrainians are essentially ethnic Russians. They share the same culture, this history, language virtually, but he was in the way of Victoria Nudelman and the UA, the State Department and CIA, so he had to go. This guy didn't do much at all. This guy was a Western stooge, and we're in this guy who's a placeman and he's just doing as he's told. Now, Zelensky came into office on a peace ticket. Zelensky promises to come up with a plan of action to stop hostilities in Donbass. He refused to disclose details of the plan, saying only it will be made public soon. This was on the 21st of April 2019. Another thing, Zelensky promises Ukraine's new president. The war in Donbass says his first step in ending the war in Donbass is to establish a ceasefire. Now, if you're drunk, that is him establishing the discussions to establish a ceasefire. And, of course, there's the picture I got it from. This is on CNN. This was a meeting in Paris, the leaders of France, Germany, Ukraine and Russia. They are mediating, the French and the Germans, and it's essentially between Putin and Zelensky. But Zelensky pissed off the crazies in Ukraine, and it's 2nd of October 29, Ukraine conflict, anger as Zelensky agrees vote deal in the east. Now in Ukrainian, I think that is no capitulation. Hundreds of Ukrainians have protested after President Zelensky said he had backed an agreement and would bring elections to territory controlled by Russian-backed separatists. In other words, all them guys are the neo-Nazis that Putin wants to purge Ukraine of, which is why the Russian military went in. No, thank you. I'm not interested in the New Yorker. Ukraine's unlikely president promising a new style of politics gets a taste of Trump's swamp. In other words, the deep state in Ukraine doesn't like what he's saying. And that more or less tells you all about it. Zelensky finds that there is no easy solutions in Donbass. The president has attempted to use the so-called Steimer formula to find a compromise on holding elections in east of Ukraine, but has run into a stark reality. Moscow and Kiev's interests remain irreconcilable. That says no capitulation, and the war goes on. This is the first year he promised sweeping changes. What he's doing. This was dated April the 25th, 2020, 2 years ago. Ending the war. He was sworn in as president on May 19th, also inherited the role of supreme commander of Ukraine's armed forces and a grinding war against Russian-backed separatists who hold parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in what is known as Donbass. More than 13,000 people have been killed since fighting began in April 2014 with the CIA-sponsored coup and the American State Department-sponsored coup. One of Zelensky's main promises was to bring the war to an end, a goal that polls have shown Ukrainians want to see accomplished more than anything. So he came into office on a peace ticket, but what happened between then and now that he turned to war? Must be either the crazies in Ukraine got to him, or the crazies in America got to him. Then we have the crazy guy, what's his name, in America, that wants Putin assassinated. I'm sure the people of the state that he represents are very proud of that guy. If I was there, he'd be just an utter embarrassment. But anyway, this is the Kiev Post, the Ukrainian newspaper. Zelensky's first year checking state of the president's campaign. This is May 20th, 2020. And it's a progress report. Free all political prisoners held in Russian-occupied territories. He managed to do it at that meeting. That is one accomplishment that he's got. Free 24 Ukrainian sailors. He did that. To create TV channels for the occupied territories. Apparently he did that. Revive the Normandy format and include the US and UK. Partially done. Leaders of Germany, France, Ukraine and Russia, i.e. that. Zelensky also promised to add the leaders of the UK and UK to the meetings. Well, he didn't, which just as well, or they would have fucked it up. Zelensky did revive the Normandy format in the meeting held in Paris on December 9th. However, the leaders of America and UK were not invited. There are no further plans to change the current format of the meetings. And he failed to stop the shootings in Donbass. Zelensky's promise to stop the shooting in Donbass is currently not happening. In the first 3 months of 2020, nearly 50 Ukrainian soldiers died in Donbass and around 200 were injured. And just like all the others, he can't do it. He's faced reality that it's an impossible situation. And now, rumour has it, he's fled to Poland, he's hiding in the US Embassy. He looks drawn and he looks a worried man. Compare that picture to, where is it? Come on. Come on, Christopher. Find the damn thing. to him. Quite a difference. And now he's blasting NATO for refusal to set up a no-fly zone over Ukraine. There's not going to be a no-fly zone. That means NATO going up against the Russian armed forces directly. That means shooting Russian planes down. That means Russian ballistic missiles attacking NATO bases. And before you know it, we've got a nuclear war on our hands. And just as a side thing from this bit, this is the NATO-Ukraine annual target plan for the year 2007 in the framework of NATO-Ukraine Action Plan. Apparently, if you read that, the Ukraine wanted to join NATO back in 2007, which means this guy wanted Ukraine in NATO. He was 5 years and 33 days in office, but he was replaced by this guy who wanted friendly ties with Russia, and all the trouble started. Shrink that down. Coming towards the end now, people. Now, where's all this heading and what's the future of that area? You can possibly say Ukraine as you know it is finished and done with. This was published more than 8 years ago by the Washington Post. It's Novorossiya, which is the traditional name of the area after the Russians grabbed it off the Turks during the 19th century, the latest historical concept to worry about Ukraine. This is essentially Novorossiya. This bit isn't. Now, this is an article about it. It's a bit Russian ethnicity, GDP, and all that. And now this is an interesting article. This tells you what you need to know about the area, Russian-speaking minority. You notice the city of Kiev has up to half the population speak Russian, and all this area is half the population speaks Russian. And above this area, nearly everybody speaks Russian, above 50%. Now the question is, what's going to happen? Whoops, silly boy. I thought this was quite interesting. You might as well call the other Noodleistan, as she's the Karzai bitch who started this problem with her CIA and State Department minions and a bag of cookies, which created the situation down in Odessa. This is the Nabia River, I think it's called. I think this is going to be a natural border between the two countries. This is just speculation, but the Russian forces seem to be going that way, so Ukraine could eventually end up like this. Brother Nathaniel in his video says this bit is going to be all under Russian control, but Russians have no intention of going here because there's no fighting going on. They're going this way, that way to surround Kiev, but most of the fighting is all in this area. I'll shrink that down. But the Donetsk Oblast and Luhansk Oblast areas, they will be definitely liberated by the Red Army and the military in the DPR and LPR. That's essentially it. I found another map. This could be as it is. see that's similar. That could be how everything pans out and the map is redrawn. I've also found this map. It's similar. Novorossiya and Ukraine is on its own. Incidentally, apparently Ukraine is a name of the Russians call a border. The people that live there call it Steppes Lovia, something like that. And this was done 1 year ago, a survey by the Washington Post, a new survey, Ukraine-Russia conflict, finds deeply divided news in the contested Donbass region. Now if you go down, you find various graphs which give the public opinion. This one, should the future of non-governmental be controlled Donbass? From Ukraine, in Ukraine without an autonomy, in Russia with economy, in Russia without autonomy, independence, don't know, refused. And get rid of that. And finally, what does Russia learn from all this? For one thing, they've known that the duplicitousness of the Western world and Western companies is not to be trusted, i.e. deceitful. What does it mean the person is duplicitous? Duplicitous is used to describe someone who intentionally misleads people, especially by saying different things to different people or acting in different ways at different times. Western companies wanted to do business with Russia, but as soon as the Western governments crack the big whip, they scarp it out of Russia as fast as they can. Well, Russia doesn't really need them, because if you go onto the debt clock, you'll see the USC debt, national debt, gross domestic product, but this one is the important one, public debt to GDP ratio. It's 98.12% in America, or about 1.18% to nearly everything America pays off its debt. Ukraine, the UK, we're even in worse situation. France is bad. Italy. The worst one of the lot is Japan, 282.84%. But where is Russia? Public debt to GDP ratio is 17.79%. Whoops! And this is an interesting video. He describes how sanctions won't work. It's a YouTube channel, so you can watch it on yourself. The Russians are not... German cars are not going to be sold to Russia. Well, Russians can do without them because they have trade links with China. I found a list of automobiles manufacturers in China, and there's dozens of them. They're all state-owned. They're independent. Russians make their own cars, but the Chinese make an awful lot of cars, and if Russia needs a new car, then the Chinese market is there. Chinese manufacturers, are waiting for them. And Pakistan has done a key deal with Russia to buy gas and wheat. This was 6th of March, which was yesterday. You can still get Russia Today by just typing rt.com in Google, and it'll take you to the Russian news site. And Russia Today might have been stopped transmitting in the West, i.e. censorship, but it's been restored in Russia's little brother, i.e. Serbia. And we're just about done now, but it's a pity that the peace deal wasn't thrashed out and implemented there, otherwise all this bloodshed and trouble would have been stopped. But you gotta blame the crazies in Ukraine for that, and the insane Western media who always hate Russia, as the Americans administration doesn't want Russia to become a strong and independent country because America doesn't like competition, but Russia have bilateral trade with China, also with India, and also with Iran. So after all this brief period of problems for Russia, she's going to be all right, but the West and America is going to go downhill, because once next winter kicks in and the Germans start feeling cold, then we're going to have all sorts of trouble in the EU, and it could signal the end of the EU and the Western Bloc and the Jews controlling the money supply and that. But we'll have to wait and see. I think this is on way over an hour, so thank you for sticking with me. If you're still here, that's it for this one, people. You know the routine: like, dislike, comment, subscribe. It's completely up to you. But if you're going to resort to calling me names on this channel, then I'll simply delete your comment and block you. This is my channel, and I don't like personal insults, as it's not constructive. But that's it for this one. Till next Monday. Bye bye.